You know that moment when the Christmas lights go up in your neighborhood and everyone starts talking about their holiday plans. The dinners, the parties, the endless gatherings, and instead of excitement, you feel something else, a quiet dread, a weight settling in your chest, the thought of another crowded room, another evening of performing joy you don't feel, another round of forced cheer that drains you more than it fills you. You're not broken. And being alone during Christmas isn't the problem. There are people who've spent decades trying to enjoy the noise, the expectations, the endless social performances that come with this season. And after years of forcing themselves to feel the magic everyone else seems to feel, they've stopped pretending. They're not running away from connection. They're guarding their peace. They're choosing solitude over exhaustion, not as a loss, but as a gift they've finally learned to give themselves. They're protecting the sanctuary they've built in the quiet corners of their own lives, the way you'd protect something you waited years to receive. And when plans get cancelled, when the house stays silent, they feel something most people would never understand. Relief. But here's what no one talks about. Why does choosing silence feel like betrayal to everyone else, but freedom to you? Why does the thought of a quiet Christmas night fill you with more peace than any crowded table ever could? Arthur Schopenhauer spent his life studying this paradox. And what he discovered might be the permission you've been waiting decades to hear. Let me explain what's actually happening here. What if this relief you feel when plans get cancelled isn't selfishness? What if it's not avoidance? What if it's your nervous system finally exhaling after holding its breath for too long? There's a psychology behind this that most people never understand. Because while the world celebrates togetherness as the highest form of connection, there are people whose hearts don't beat faster in crowds. They beat steadier in silence. Their energy doesn't rise with noise, it drains. And after decades of trying to enjoy the very things that exhaust them, they've learned something profound. Sometimes, the absence of celebration isn't a loss. Sometimes, it's a sanctuary. Schopenhauer understood this deeply. He spent his life observing that the people with the richest inner worlds often needed the least external stimulation. The more complex your internal life, the less you need the world to entertain you. And during Christmas, when the world demands performance, when every gathering feels like a stage you didn't audition for, your body knows the truth. This isn't rest, this is work. And you've been working for free for far too long. But here's the interesting part. This isn't new for you, is it? It wasn't always this way. There was a time when you believed the story that said Christmas was supposed to feel magical, that you were supposed to light up when invitations arrived, that the warmth of a crowded room was supposed to fill something inside you. And for years, maybe decades, you tried. You showed up. You smiled. You performed the joy everyone expected. And every single time, you walked away feeling more drained than when you arrived. I remember someone telling me once that the holidays were about connection, and I believed them. I spent years thinking that if I just tried harder, if I just pushed through the exhaustion, I'd finally feel what everyone else seemed to feel. But the truth is, I never did. And for the longest time, I thought that meant something was wrong with me, that I was broken, that I was missing some essential part of what it meant to be human. But their preference for silence wasn't a flaw, it was a design. Because while the world equates solitude with sadness, they've discovered something most people spend their entire lives searching for: peace, clarity, freedom, the sanctuary of their own company. And when the Christmas season arrives, when the world gets louder and the expectations get heavier, they don't feel guilty for choosing themselves anymore. They feel relief. Because after decades of performing joy, they didn't feel. They've finally learned that staying home isn't missing out. It's opting in to rest, to peace, to the life they've been building quietly, away from the noise. And choosing a quiet Christmas is also a way of living. Still, here's a curiosity. Why does the world insist that this is wrong? Why do people who choose silence get labeled as antisocial, cold, or broken? There's a psychology behind this that most people never understand. Because the truth is, the people who thrive in solitude often possess something the world doesn't know how to measure: depth, introspection, a complex inner life that doesn't need constant external validation to feel whole. Schopenhauer called this inner richness. He observed that people with profound internal worlds often found social gatherings exhausting, not because they lacked social skills, but because their minds were already full of thoughts, reflections, observations. And when you add the noise of forced cheer, the performance of holiday joy, the endless small talk that leads nowhere, it doesn't energize them, it drains them. Because socializing, for them, isn't leisure. It's a chore, a second job they never applied for. And the world doesn't understand this. The world says, you're missing out. You should be with people. You should be celebrating. But what the world doesn't see is that after decades of trying to enjoy crowded rooms, they've learned something the world refuses to accept. Sometimes, the richest celebration is the one that happens in silence. Sometimes, the deepest connection is the one you have with yourself. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is permission to stay home. History's greatest thinkers understood this: Schopenhauer, Rilke, Thoreau. They didn't avoid the world because they hated people. They chose solitude because it allowed them to think, to create, to exist without the constant demand to perform. And during Christmas, when the world demands performance more than any other time of year, people like you are simply honoring what they've always known. That peace isn't found in the noise. It's found in the quiet spaces between. Still, here's a curiosity. What are they protecting themselves from? Let me tell you. There are 3 reasons why people choose a quiet Christmas, and none of them are what the world thinks. First, it's about energy. Not laziness, not antisocial behavior. Energy. Because for some people, socializing isn't just tiring, it's depleting. Every conversation, every smile, every moment of forced cheer drains something essential. And during Christmas, when the world expects you to show up again and again, when every week brings another gathering, another obligation, another performance, your body starts to shut down. Not because you're weak, but because you're exhausted. And after decades of pushing through that exhaustion, you've finally learned that rest isn't selfish. It's survival. Second, it's about trust. Because here's a secret they rarely say out loud. Most holiday gatherings aren't about connection. They're about performance. People perform happiness. They perform closeness. They perform the idea of family and togetherness, even when the reality is shallow, transactional, or worse, draining. And after years of sitting in rooms full of people who take more than they give, who demand your energy but offer nothing in return, you start to realize something. Your dog doesn't judge your silence, your cat doesn't drain your energy, and the quiet of your own home offers more genuine peace than any crowded table ever could. Third, it's about preference, not avoidance. Preference. Because while the world assumes that solitude is a last resort, a sign of failure or loneliness, the truth is far more beautiful. Some people genuinely prefer their own company. They prefer the stillness of a quiet evening to the chaos of a crowded party. They prefer the sanctuary of their home to the performance of forced cheer. And after decades of pretending otherwise, they've finally given themselves permission to honor that preference, not as a loss, but as a gift. If you are someone who feels more peace in the quiet of your own home than in the noise of a holiday gathering, you're not broken, you're not cold, you're not missing out, you're choosing yourself. And that choice, after decades of choosing everyone else, is one of the bravest things you can do. If you are someone who finds more peace in solitude than in crowds, you're not alone. This journey of choosing peace over performance is happening quietly, all over the world, right now. After years of trying to fit in, millions of people like you are finally choosing themselves. Before we go deeper into what this means for your life, take a moment to join this quiet corner of the internet, a space for people who've spent decades feeling different and are finally finding their peace. And if this resonates with you, share in the comments what part of this journey touched you most deeply. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. You're not alone in feeling this way. Let's continue. Because what comes next might be the very thing you've been carrying in silence for years. Let me shift for a moment and speak directly to you. Not about you, to you. What if nothing is wrong? What if the relief you feel when plans get cancelled isn't a character flaw? What if the peace you find in a quiet Christmas night isn't loneliness? What if the world needs more people like you? People who've stopped performing, people who've stopped pretending, people who've finally learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I spent years thinking I was broken. I'd watch people around me laugh in groups, make plans, text constantly, and I'd wonder, why don't I want that? Why does the thought of another dinner, another party, another gathering fill me with dread instead of excitement? And for the longest time, I believed the story the world told me, that something was missing, that I needed to try harder, that if I just pushed through the exhaustion, I'd finally feel what everyone else seemed to feel. But I never did. And one day, I stopped trying. And in that stillness, in that quiet refusal to perform anymore, I found something I'd been searching for my entire life. Peace, clarity, freedom, the sanctuary of my own company. And I realized something profound. Solitude isn't a state of being alone, it's a state of mind. It's the choice to honor your own energy, your own needs, your own truth, even when the world demands otherwise. Schopenhauer understood this. He wrote that a person can only be themselves when they're alone, and if they don't love solitude, they won't love freedom. Because freedom isn't just the absence of obligation, it's the presence of choice. And when you choose a quiet Christmas, you're not choosing loneliness. You're choosing freedom. The freedom to rest, the freedom to breathe, the freedom to exist without the constant demand to perform. At 50, 60, 70, you've earned the right to choose peace. You've spent decades showing up for people who didn't show up for you. You've performed joy you didn't feel. You've exhausted yourself trying to fit into a world that was never built for people like you. And now, finally, you're choosing yourself. And that choice, after decades of choosing everyone else, is one of the most powerful things you can do. And now it's time to talk directly to you. Maybe you are one of these people. Maybe you've spent years believing that your preference for solitude was a flaw, that your need for quiet was a weakness, that your relief when plans got cancelled was something to be ashamed of. But here's the truth. It doesn't mean you never get lonely. It doesn't mean you don't crave connection. It means you've learned the difference between solitude and loneliness, between rest and laziness, between choosing yourself and avoiding the world. Solitude is chosen. Loneliness is not. Solitude is the sanctuary you build in the quiet corners of your own life. Loneliness is the ache you feel when that sanctuary is forced upon you, when you didn't choose it, when it feels like a prison instead of a gift. And the people who choose a quiet Christmas aren't lonely. They're free. Free from the performance. Free from the exhaustion. Free from the endless demand to be someone they're not. And here's what the world doesn't understand. Choosing solitude doesn't make you weak. It gives you strength. Because while others fear missing out, you've discovered the joy of opting out, the joy of staying home, the joy of honoring your own energy, your own needs, your own truth. And that joy, that quiet, profound joy, is something most people spend their entire lives searching for. But there is something important still waiting to be said. Let's go deeper into the psychology. Because the people who choose a quiet Christmas aren't just avoiding the noise, they're protecting something far more valuable: their peace, their energy, their sanctuary. And there are 4 reasons why this matters more than the world will ever understand. First, it's about energy management. After decades of performing socially, they've learned that their energy is finite, that every conversation, every gathering, every moment of forced cheer drains something essential. And they've learned to protect that energy, not because they're selfish, but because they've finally realized that if they don't protect it, no one else will. And during Christmas, when the world demands more energy than any other time of year, they've learned to say no. Not out of avoidance, but out of wisdom. Second, it's about trust and vulnerability. Because here's the truth. Most holiday gatherings aren't about connection. They're about performance. People perform happiness. They perform closeness. They perform the idea of family and togetherness, even when the reality is shallow, transactional, or worse, draining. And after years of sitting in rooms full of people who take more than they give, they've learned something profound. Real connection doesn't happen in crowded rooms. It happens in quiet moments, in deep conversations, in the sanctuary of trust. And if that trust isn't there, the gathering isn't worth the energy it costs. Third, it's about their complex inner life. Because the people who choose solitude often possess something the world doesn't know how to measure. Depth, introspection, a rich internal world that doesn't need constant external stimulation to feel whole. Schopenhauer observed this. He wrote that the people with the most complex inner lives often needed the least external validation because their minds were already full of thoughts, reflections, observations. And when you add the noise of forced cheer, the performance of holiday joy, the endless small talk that leads nowhere, it doesn't energize them, it drains them. Fourth, it's about control over their environment. Because here's what the world doesn't see. Their home isn't just a house, it's a sanctuary, a safe haven, a fortress they've built against a world that constantly demands more than they can give. And during Christmas, when the world gets louder and the expectations get heavier, that sanctuary becomes more important than ever, because it's the one place where they don't have to perform, where they don't have to pretend, where they can finally breathe. And here's the paradox. Sometimes, the reason they love solitude so much is because the world once disappointed them, because they tried, they showed up, they performed, and the world didn't show up for them in return. And after decades of that disappointment, they've learned something the world refuses to accept. Protecting your peace isn't avoidance, it's emotional wisdom. And choosing a quiet Christmas isn't loneliness, it's freedom. After a lifetime of performing socially, they finally learned that the greatest gift they can give themselves is permission to stay home. Picture this. You're standing at your window, watching the Christmas lights twinkle in your neighbor's yard. You can hear the faint sound of laughter from a party down the street. And instead of feeling left out, instead of feeling like you're missing something, you feel something else. Relief, peace, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you're exactly where you need to be. Society glorifies togetherness as if solitude is failure, as if choosing yourself is selfish, as if rest is laziness. But here's the truth. Rest is part of growth. Stillness is part of clarity. And solitude, chosen solitude, is one of the most powerful forms of self-care you can practice. Because while the world equates busyness with worth, you've learned something far more valuable. That your worth isn't measured by how many gatherings you attend. It's measured by how well you honor your own needs, your own energy, your own truth. And here's the hidden quality the world doesn't see. Self-companionship. The ability to sit with yourself, to enjoy your own company, to find peace in the quiet spaces of your own life. Your cat curled beside you understands more than most people ever will. Your dog doesn't judge your silence, and the stillness of your own home offers more genuine connection than any crowded table ever could. While others fear missing out, you've discovered the joy of opting out, and that joy, that quiet, profound joy, is something the world will never understand. but you don't need them to. Because you've finally learned that the greatest celebration isn't the one that happens in the noise. It's the one that happens in the silence, in the sanctuary of your own peace. You are not strange for choosing a quiet Christmas. You are not cold for preferring your own company. You are not broken for feeling relief when plans get cancelled. You are not missing out. You are not avoiding life. You are not failing at connection. You are building a life that doesn't exhaust you. You are honoring your own energy. You are protecting the sanctuary you've spent decades building. And after years of performing joy you didn't feel, you're finally choosing yourself. And that choice, after decades of choosing everyone else, is one of the bravest things you can do. One day, you will sit at a table again. You will laugh with people you love. You will celebrate, but not because you're forced to, not because the world demands it, but because you choose to, because the connection is real, because the energy is mutual, because the gathering fills you instead of draining you. And when that day comes, you'll know the difference, because you've finally learned what the world refuses to accept. That peace isn't found in the noise. It's found in the quiet spaces between, and you've earned the right to protect those spaces. After decades of trying to fit in, you finally learned that the greatest gift you can give yourself is permission to be exactly who you are. Peace, freedom, sanctuary, clarity. These aren't luxuries, they're necessities, and you've earned every single one of them. If this resonates with you, if you want to go even deeper into understanding why solitude feels like home, there's more waiting for you here. Another conversation, another layer, just for you. This is Alone Together, a quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections. If you're here, you're not broken. You're just built differently, and you're not alone in being alone.